The anime begins with the protagonist of this story, Yusuke Yatsuya, defeating some enemies while thinking that this world is more exciting than the city of Tokyo. Some time ago, the young man was in class when he and his classmates noticed that two girls were absent from class, which seems to happen quite often. However, the next day, the protagonist sees that Yushindo, the prettiest student in the class, has returned, but he is surprised that she is talking to another one of his classmates, Kusu Hakozaki. This seems strange to him because he doesn't remember them being friends. When the teacher asks Yatsuya to fill out the form to know which university he is interested in attending, and when the teacher leaves, he tells the girls that he is responsible for closing the classroom. But when he turns around, they are no longer there. And at that moment, the place becomes different, and without realizing it, he ends up in a lake in an unknown place surrounded by monsters. But what surprises him the most is that Shindu and Hakozaki are with him. Once the protagonist is in that place, a man with half a head missing appears. He calls himself the Game Master. He tells him that he must explain the rules, but actually, throughout the journey, his classmates will explain everything to him. Then he shows them the steps they must follow, and that every time they complete one of these missions, a new player will be added. So being 3 now, they are on the 3rd mission, which is to fulfill the boss's request. But before they start, Game Master spins a roulette wheel where Yatsuya's occupation will be chosen. The girls wish for him to be a warrior, but luckily he gets the occupation of a farmer, which leaves the girls somewhat disappointed. When Game Master leaves the place, the girls show what their occupations are in that place. Shindu is a wind sorceress, while Hakozaki is a sword-wielding warrior. Then the girls tell them that Yu was the first to go to that place, and the ruler of the place asked her to befriend Kusu. So the next day she was there, and they knew that the next one would be him. On the way, they encounter some goblins, so the protagonist knows that his moment has come. But his scythe is useless since his weapon breaks. So he asks the girls for help because they are strong with their characters, but the wind power of the sorceress is too weak, while the warrior says she is too scared to face the enemy. So she just throws the sword at the goblin, hitting it on the head. Yatsuya sees the sword and decides to grab it, but he can't, as only those with that occupation can use it. Not knowing what else to do, the young man took his last weapon, but it breaks again, and with a blow from his enemy, he faints. When he wakes up, he notices his body on the ground, so he thinks that maybe he lost his life, but immediately he returns to life. So Shindu explains to him that they can revive after 30 seconds. So the young man takes advantage and sacrifices himself to defeat them. When everything is over, the protagonist tells the girls that he is surprised that they have passed the previous missions. Then, due to the young man's doubt, Shindu tells him that if they all die together, they lose their lives in the real world, so they must be careful. That night, the protagonist asks the girls what their reward is for winning the mission. So Shindu tells him that he has the right to ask Game Master a question, and she used that question to find out why he chose her, to which he replied that someone she knows requested it, while Hakozaki used it and found out that he comes from a distant future. So the young man thinks he should ask. That night, while the protagonist went out to reflect on what happened, he hears a noise coming from where his friends are, and when he arrives, he finds everything on fire and Kusu on the ground missing some parts of her body. And when he looks up, he sees a huge monster holding Shindu. She asks him to flee because they won't be able to defeat it. And at that moment, the monster eats the girl, leaving the young man speechless and thinking that if he ends up like them, everyone will lose their lives for real. So he takes Hakozaki and flees the place, but before he leaves, he shouts to Yu that they will go to the village, although he doesn't know she can hear him. The next day, Kusu regenerated her entire body except for her arm, so she says it's because the monster ate it. So this makes the young man think that Shindu won't regenerate and that this is really as they say. So now he only thinks about completing the mission and that his partner can return. When they arrive at the village, everyone welcomes them as heroes because in the world of video games, they are called that when they arrive with the village chief. He gives them the mission, and luckily for Yatsuya, they must defeat the troll that ate his friend, so he decides to go alone to level up and defeat the troll. After what happened, the protagonist sets out to find goblins and weak monsters to level up since he won't be able to defeat the troll with his low level. However, on the way, he finds a logbook. These logs contain memories of what happened in that place. Upon touching it, you can see his 2 friends talking about who they would like the next player to be. Hakozaki mentions one of their classmates who does judo, while Shindu chooses Yatsuya, which surprises him. However, he remembers that there is another classmate with that name in his class, so he stays to wait for her to say which one she chose. But the protagonist sneezed, interrupting the logbook and ending it, so he couldn't hear whom he was waiting for. Now he thinks he has a 50% chance that it's him. Later on the way, he encounters several goblins, so without hesitation, he ends up defeating them, but also because he was blinded by the rage that he started attacking them with everything. Unfortunately, one escapes, so he only manages to reach level 9. At that moment, he begins to think that he shouldn't have been given that occupation and should have been a warrior. He wonders if he can change it since it would be useful to have a sword like his friends. When he checks his logbook, he sees that Hakozaki is seconds away from reviving, so he runs out because something happened to her. But when he returns to the village, he sees that the place is being set on fire. so he has no doubt that it was the troll's fault and his mission is not being completed. So he wonders what would happen if they don't complete it, and if they could really lose their lives. Seeing his logbook again, he can see that she hasn't revived, so he assumes that the monster ate her, so now only he remains. On the way, he comes across a logbook of the place, and upon touching it, he sees Kusu practicing with her sword and telling a young villager that in her world she cannot do physical activities due to her illness, and that her parents buy her expensive medicine so she doesn't get worse. She feels like a burden in her world, but in this one, it's completely different because she can do it, and as long as she can, she'll try to help those in need. The young man feels frustrated because he says that since he arrived in that place, he only thought about himself, and it was even like that at school, and didn't see what others felt. At that moment, the troll appears, so he decides to flee since he is not prepared to face it, but the monster follows him and hits him. While in the air, he thinks he must move forward, so when he falls, he runs away from the place, but the troll starts following him. At that moment, he has a memory of when he was a child and promised to return to his hometown with his friends once they graduate, so he takes that plus what he heard from Hakozaki to keep going. But he knows he can't just run away, so he tries to think about how to attack. Luckily, a goblin appears, and he takes the opportunity to finish it off and level up. Once he does, time stops and Game Master appears and starts spinning the roulette again to know what his new occupation will be. The young man begs it to be a warrior or something with a blade, but he gets a cook. Yatsuya is disappointed, but when he sees that this occupation gives him a knife as a weapon and the ability to see the monsters inside. Once time flows again, the protagonist cuts and wounds the troll, and thanks to this, his friends revive. So the young man tells them what his attack pattern is since they only have to dodge it once the monster jumps because over time it will get tired because it is injured. Thanks to a surprise attack from Shindu, they manage to defeat their enemy even though they revived many times. When they complete the mission, Game Master appears to ask Yatsuya his question. The young man asks for time to celebrate the victory, but after what the girls told him, he decides to ask what will happen once they complete the last mission. The entity shows them a version of what happened in that world, and the boys can see Tokyo being invaded by some monsters, but the biggest one is a dragon. When the boys react, they realize that they have returned to the city, so they wonder what they saw. But Shindu thanks the young man for saving her since she didn't know if he would return for the tournament. When the protagonist and Hikozaki return home, the girl thanks him for helping her, but he tries to seem interesting and says that in a world like that, it is normal to say something like he will protect her. Then he remembers that vision where the dragon invades his city. The next day, Shindu is chatting with Kusu, who tells her about what happened when she was going home with Yatsuya, so the young woman finds it funny. When she sees her friend Hashi, she asks her if she knows the boy, but she only remembers that he changed schools when he was a kid but never spoke to him. So Yu says that talking to him seemed like an interesting person. Meanwhile, the protagonist goes out for a run while thinking about the vision he saw, but at that moment Game Master calls him and gives him a new mission, which is to conquer a young woman. To meet her, he is guided to a school, and upon reaching the women's bathroom, he sees some girls recording a student with glasses, and she is the one he must conquer. Since it's his first time, the young man doesn't know what to do, but thinking that she was being harassed, he starts destroying all the cell phones, and once he finishes, the girls run away while he stays with the student thinking he came out as a hero. Later, the protagonist accompanies the girl home, as that is what a gentleman does, but she doesn't know why he is still by her side. At that moment, she tells him that the girls were getting back at her for something she did. Before leaving, the girl tells him that he should watch a program to become popular with girls. When he returns home, the protagonist, while in his room watching the program the girl recommended, is transported to the other world. Upon arriving, he can see that the girl is the fourth member named Yuka Takatate, who doesn't understand what is happening, and when she sees Game Master, she enters into crisis. Once she is assigned the occupation of Fire Mage, Game Master shows them their next mission, which is to explore 5% of the map, although he also tells them that the resurrection time increases. After this, the man leaves. Yatsuya tries to approach Yuka, but she moves away from him, calling him a pervert, so her friends don't understand what happened. So she explains what happened when they met and that the girls who were with her told them that he was a pervert who installed cameras in the bathrooms. After this, the boys go to fulfill their mission, so they decide to split up to cover more ground. Shindu goes with Yuka and realizes that she lied about the story, but she doesn't judge her because she was only trying to make peace with the other students and not be the target of mockery. Yu tells her that she always tries to maintain a good status, but at the same time likes to take matters into her own hands because harassment is nonsense, and whenever she sees it, she tries to stop it. Later, the boys gather and realize that they couldn't explore much space on the first day, but at that moment, a large insect appears in the place and others come out of it, attacking the boys. Yuka tries to defeat them since she is a big fan of anime and believes her dream has come true, but as she is at the first level, she doesn't achieve anything. When the protagonist revives, he starts attacking the insects, impressing not only Shindu, but also the student with glasses, and finally Yatsuya along with Heikozaki defeat the monster. That night, Shindu has a dream where she remembers her first friend named Sayuri, someone older than her who was always by her side, but one night something bad happened to her. and while she slept, she heard her father say that what happened to her was because she had an ugly face. This makes her wake up, but Yatsuya thinks it was his fault since he was training. But seeing her sad, he knows that something else is wrong with her since he never saw her like that at school. So when he asks her why she was crying, she takes his hand and asks him to help her. After what happened, Shindu tells the protagonist that when she was little, she used to be a troublesome girl, but she met an older girl who changed her life because she became her best friend. However, she took her own life because she was a victim of bullying at school, but had no one to talk to. After that, she suffered a lot because when she started elementary school, she went through the same thing, and the only ones who were by her side were her friends. She taught her that they were her strength, and since then she has strived to be better so as not to end up like her friend. However, she ended up in that world, so she asked the young man to help her not lose in the game since she would lose everything. The next morning, the boys arrive at the village where they face the troll but see everything in ruins. Then a villager appears on his horse and tells them that no one has lived in that village for 4 years, so Heikozaki remembers the boy she spoke to, wishing he is still healthy. The protagonist takes the opportunity to ask about Rodorpo since it is part of his mission to bring him goods, but luckily the man is on the other side of the continent, so it will take them months to reach him, although on horseback only 30 days, so the boys decide to participate in the tournament that is about to take place since the prize is 3 horses. On the way, the boys sense a presence thinking they are goblins, but they are actually humans who are bandits, so Yatsuya tries to confront them, but when he wounds one, he loses experience points, lowering his level, so they have to flee. But Shindu stops them with her wind ability while the others run, so when they manage to escape, they realize their friend is not there, so they assume she was captured. However, the protagonist tells his companion that they must move forward because it is important to fulfill the mission no matter if some characters are missing, because that way they can return to reality and everyone will be alive. Yuka gets upset because she says she overheard the conversation they had at night and can't understand why he won't help her again since she asked him to. The young man keeps his word because he believes that way he can help her and he would sacrifice himself for them to continue the game. The girl is not very convinced and talks privately with Hirozaki, and both go in search of their friend while the young man is left alone again and continues his path. Despite the girls being willing to save their friend, they end up being captured by the same bandits, and the protagonist, upon learning this, realizes that he is truly alone. At that moment, goblins appear, so he finishes them all off, and as a reward, he levels up and now has a new occupation as a biological mage. While the girls are locked up thinking about their teammate who won't rescue them, the protagonist is at the tournament, but despite having in mind to win in less than 5 seconds, it loses to a knight. When he comes back to life, the young man asks the favor of lending him a horse since he must be in Rodorpo in a few days. But the knight, who is actually a young woman named Kahabel, tells him that she will only do it if he helps them get rid of some trolls. But Yatsuya remembers the bandits who kidnapped his friend, and as he knows their location, he tells her he will help her catch them. That afternoon, the girl teaches Yatsuya how to practice with his sword since she knows he is a novice, but in all attempts to attack, the young man fails since he was never good at sports in reality, but he keeps trying. That night, the army led by Captain Kahabel and Yatsuya arrives at the bandits' hideout. At that moment, a confrontation occurs where the soldiers have the advantage, while the protagonist realizes that when defending against human attacks, he doesn't lose experience points. However, the bandits release a berserker. According to the soldier, when you eat meat with more magic than the body can tolerate, like that of a monster, you become one. Kahabel is the one who faces that beast since she is excited to fight someone stronger. But due to the difference in size and strength, the girl is about to lose. However, Yatsuya stops it from finishing her off, although he is no match for the beast. But he remembers his new occupation and distracts the berserker and manages to wound it. But the monster finishes him off with a single blow, although thanks to this, Kahabel takes the opportunity and manages to defeat it. After the battle ends and the girls are freed, Kahabel proposes to take them to Rodorpo, but in exchange asks them to return the horse and help them in the art of swords. So the next morning, the boys set out for their destination. Heikozaki recounts that due to her illness, she was never able to do any activities, so she set out to study and work on a drug that could cure her and her mother. However, being in that world, she realizes that her requirements to survive have changed, as the violence that always seemed absurd to her is now an essential skill to move forward. The next day, while everyone camps to rest, Heikozaki and Shindu cannot stop thinking about the violence they saw in the battle, so neither of them has much appetite. However, Kuchu says she wants to help and protect her friends and the inhabitants of that place, but she feels incompetent. She looks at Yatsuya, who is happily preparing food for everyone, but Yuka says he only does it to gain experience. When they are about to finish eating, Kahabel approaches them, saying she wants to start training them. However, the boys don't seem very happy since the protagonist told them that of all the battles they had, he could only win 3, and the soldier, after several confrontations, started using her real sword, causing real cuts. The first to practice is Yuka, who is not very happy, and when she returns, she tells her companions that despite not tending to feel much pain in that world, her blows do hurt. The next is Heikozaki. whom Cannibal realizes cannot even lift a sword despite being a warrior, so it will take her time. But at that moment, some of her soldiers arrive to tell them that goblins attack them. So the protagonist helps heal some injured soldiers who came out hurt, while Yuka only complains that he gains experience even without fighting. So the young man tells her to complain to the system. Kusu overhears their conversations and knows that because of the system, they are in that place. Later, the group is about to encounter a village of goblins, so the soldiers recommend deviating, but Yatsuya proposes to confront them since they have only been training, so it was time to put it into practice. During the fight, Hakozaki is not satisfied with fighting, but when a goblin approaches her, she only raises her sword and defeats it. However, that night she doesn't feel happy about it since she still feels the sensation of how she ended her enemy. However, Kahabel congratulates her for winning her first combat, although she feels overwhelmed because she couldn't cut any flesh. Kuchu asks her why, and she excitedly says she likes the feeling when she defeats each enemy. Then she leaves because she thinks she can see more goblins around, while Hakozaki thinks she will set aside what she feels, since she has the goal of leaving that place and achieving her dream. The next day, the group continues their journey, but on the way they see that there is a confrontation where civilians are being attacked by monsters. When Hakozaki hears that there is a child in the place, she remembers the villager, so she decides to go help them. Her companions disagree since it would waste time, but the young woman is determined to stay and go alone if necessary. But after she explains to them that surviving in that place without having helped others would be meaningless, the protagonist decides to stay with her and face them, while the others continue their way since he thinks they could also help them reach their destination. Upon arrival, they can see that there are about 3 Miri kobolds, which are kind of stronger wolves than the soldiers. They barely see them coming out after the heroes, but in the fight, Kusu is the first to lose her life, while the protagonist tries to defeat one of them, but is attacked from behind and also loses. When Hakozaki is waiting to be resurrected, she thinks that maybe it was useless to go face them since she doesn't know how to fight, but upon returning, she waits for one of them to attack her, and at the moment the enemy reaches her, she surprisingly draws her sword, finishing off the opponent, so Yatsuya thinks she has become stronger. However, there is still a Miri kobolds left, but at that moment, she sees her friends coming from afar, so she calls her enemy, and thanks to Kahabel, they defeat him. When everything is over, Yatsuya helps the wounded while they ask him where they are headed. The soldiers tell him that they are taking goods to Road of Dorpo, but it is about the people since they will be executed for being criminals. The boys feel confused because when remembering their mission, they must take goods to their destination, but they don't know that that is incorrect since those people, including the child, will be sacrificed. Then Kahabel gets upset with the soldier because he says that his kingdom is considering taking the lives of its own citizens in other lands. When the girl presents herself to him, the man just smiles as his city is bigger and he is Kamilto, the first corporal of the Diak kingdom, so he says she should speak to him with respect. But the young woman doesn't plan to do so as she disagrees with him, so they are about to confront each other at that moment, but Shindu stops them. Later, the heroes have a small meeting to discuss the matter, so they decide to accompany the soldiers to the city while thinking about the approach they will take, as they don't want those people to lose their lives. That night, the protagonist and his companions talk to one of the hostages named Fossil, a missionary from the Ige continent. He tells them that he thought the kingdom would spare the child's life, but it didn't happen because the kingdom executes followers of Arteros, even foreigners. This is because some time ago the city was divided between those who worship the king and those who worship a god. But after a conflict between both sides, religion was banned. Then the boys talk to Kamilto, who tells them that they execute to set an example. As the Diak continent is the gateway to Aija, they stop them there to prevent their expansion. He plans to continue with the king's orders since before orphans and families unable to go to war were condemned. But the current king changed everything, saving them from ruin, and he aims to unify the continent. For that, the religion of Arteros must be exterminated. Yuka gets upset because she disagrees that the larger group should eliminate the smaller one just to save themselves, as that becomes an endless cycle. Kamilto realizes that she's insulting his king, so he says he will end her, but Yatsuya stops him as they are just talking, although he also thinks the same way. The next morning, Kahabel trains with Shindu, and despite having improved, she says that a woman cannot defeat a man, so she must use fencing to win against them. Later, they arrive at the mountains, and Kamilto tells the protagonist that it will take 12 days to arrive, but there is another faster route, so they decide to go that way. Upon reaching a cave, the boys wait for the soldier's instructions, but it was all a trap as he leaves them trapped because he does not want to travel with sympathizers of the religion. Yatsuya realizes that they lost the prisoners and now they are losing time, but Kahabel tells them to cross the place as it has an exit, so the others follow her. However, the place has traps, and in the first one, the young man manages to stop it, while in the second trap, Yatsuya falls into the void but resurrects and remains trapped. So the girls try to decipher it, and thanks to Hakozaki, they manage to pass, although they leave the young man behind. Finally, they reach the end of the road, but in front of them, there is an arena, and on the other side, a gargoyle that according to Kahabel is mummified and can go a long time without moving, but at that moment it breaks free, so now they must face it. The protagonist tries to escape from that void, using his knife to make holes in the wall and climb, but in his attempts, he falls and loses his life. However, this doesn't deter him, as he begins to remember that he was alone all the time, and even in this world he tried to go his own way, which gives him the strength to not give up, and after several attempts, he manages to get out. After Yatsuya manages to escape, he tries to get out of that cave, but the darkness is an obstacle. Along the way, the young man encounters a checkpoint where his group is tearfully bidding farewell to one of Kahabel's soldiers. At that moment, he begins to remember the moments he lived with him. After saying goodbye, he continues his way. Meanwhile, the girls are at the end of the cave. Kahabel is about to face the gargoyle while the others stop the bats in the area. During the fight, the soldier congratulates Shindu for her ability to stop the animals. So she tells him that it's because in the real world, she practices tennis, but she remembers that she lost her skills because she came to this world affecting her life. She says she will continue practicing. However, at that moment, the monster defeats Kahabel with a serious wound and she falls into the water. The girls are surprised that their friend lost. The gargoyle is about to attack Shindo, but at that moment, everything stops. Then the girl remembers what her friend told her. When you reach level 10, time stops. Game Master appears to spin the roulette again and see her new occupation, but this helps her to attack her opponent. When time returns, Shindu is a warrior swordswoman, although the enemy is stronger and she cannot hurt him. But then she remembers what Kahabel told her while they were practicing, that when facing a stronger enemy, she must attack his vital points, and that way she can win. So the girl takes her sword and decides to win, tries to hurt him, but the gargoyle cuts her arm. However, she dodges one of its moves and grasps her sword again, managing to injure it. Meanwhile, the protagonist runs towards the exit, thinking about why they were chosen and what their purpose is. Although for now, he must focus on moving forward with his group, and being the strongest, he takes the position of leader. Once he manages to get out, he can see that Shindu defeated the enemy, but knowing that Kahabel is injured in the water, he doesn't hesitate to jump to rescue her. However, her friends got upset because he jumped to help her, while when they were in danger, he wanted to leave them behind. Later, Kahabel wakes up and can see that her wound has healed, so her companion tells her that the heroes saved her and consumed the monster's blood to continue healing, but he exhausted himself and has been resting since then. But once the soldier leaves, the girl kisses Yatsuya in gratitude. However, just then, the girls arrive and see what she did, and they are confused, so she explains that she did it because he reminds her of herself as she seeks to know who she is in this world. At night, while the girls are wondering if they will fulfill the mission, Yatsuya wakes up in an exasperated manner, realizing that the hostages are not the goods. In previous missions, they were never specified for each village or type of enemy, so any of the options would serve to pass the missions. Taking this into account, the goods may refer to the goods and objects since no one is waiting in the place for the arrival of the hostages. The girls get upset because everything they did was in vain. Hakozaki looks at his friend and realizes that he is thinking of leaving them behind, so he starts to get upset with him because unlike them, those people can really live their lives. But Yatsuya says that there is a possibility that they are the goods, so he decides that they should separate so that they don't fail the mission. After what happened, the protagonist suggests splitting up and forming two groups. One will pursue the Diok soldiers to save the prisoners, and the other will search for another shipment heading to Rotodorpo. They must decide where each group will go. Kahabel says she will go after the soldiers as she wants to avenge her friend's death, while the others must decide where they will go. The next day, the groups set out on their missions. Shindu, along with Hakozaki and the soldier Makwa, goes in search of a shipment destined for Rotodorpo, while Kahabel, Yatsuya, and Yuka go after the soldiers. However, that night, the boys talk about what they should do once they find them. The soldier tells them that before Kamilto and his companions locked them in the cave, they sent messages so they could have warned their kingdom that they are with citizens of Kortono. If something happens to them, it could spark a war between both kingdoms, and Kahabel doesn't want that. That's why the young man proposes that before freeing the prisoners, they must force the soldiers to write a letter stating that Kortono is not the enemy. To make sure they are not considered enemies, he comes up with an idea while putting on a villainous face, leaving the girls frightened. Later, the boys are preparing to start their plan, but Hakozaki tells the protagonist that he is good at devising evil plans because he has experience with battle video games, while she says she also plays games, but her games are completely different. Then she asks him if a kiss in that world counts as her first kiss because she saw the kiss Kahabel gave him and felt a little jealous. For him, it counts because that world, despite being a game, feels too real. The following night, while the soldier is giving a speech to his comrades because there are only a few days left to complete their mission and reduce the expansion of their enemies, the protagonist appears in front of them. The soldiers are surprised to see that he managed to escape, but the young man tells them that he only went to negotiate because the soldiers accompanying them lost their lives in the cave and two of his friends fell into a well. Now only he and Yuka, who also accompany him, remain, and she tries to seem distant from him, saying that only negotiation will benefit him. Yatsuya explains to them that as heroes they can resurrect, and no matter how much they fight him, they can never defeat them. But he asks them to release the hostages, otherwise he will spread the faith of Arteros as he is now a devout follower. After telling them this, he gives them until dawn. After the young man leaves, the soldiers think about what they will do, but at that moment, Yuka arrives to tell them that she wants to betray her companion by leading them to where he is. So the soldiers agree, and the girl can't believe they fell into the trap. Later, Yuka goes with the soldiers to where Yatsuya is sleeping, but before they arrive, one of the soldiers injures the girl, and when they check the place, they realize that she lied. So when she comes back to life, they hold her hostage. When they return to their camp, the protagonist is in place, and the soldiers see that the young man has fished off all the prisoners and left without fulfilling their mission because he says he only wanted to avenge his lost friends and lied about being a faithful follower of that faith. Yuka frees herself and runs to where her friend is, so both escape while the soldiers follow them, thinking they made a mistake getting involved with the heroes. But Yatsuya knows that with this, the kingdom of Diok will not mess with the kingdom of Kortenal. Once the boys manage to escape, they meet with the hostages hiding in a cave, as they made the bodies themselves to make it look like they were real. However, they had to end the soldier who was left as an escort because otherwise it wouldn't seem real. But thanks to their plan, they were able to avoid war, although Yu questions whether it is necessary to end someone's life just to avoid a tragedy because even though they are in another world, it is too real. So the young man says he would do it if necessary or if it is to save the lives of his friends. Soldier Kamilto feels frustrated because he only wanted to fulfill his king's orders, but when they were planning to search for those responsible, and after they sent another letter to their king, Kahabel appears and kills one of the soldier's companions, leaving him speechless, as he thought he had disappeared in the cave as the hero told him. However, the girl asks him to take his sword to face her, but no matter how much the man tries to avenge himself, she defeats him after he says he was only seeking peace in the world. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Diok, the king receives the letter stating that his men have failed in their mission, but they also realize that the heroes are their enemies, so there could be a great confrontation in the future. To prepare, he asks one of his men to investigate how they can defeat them. The next day, the protagonist group prepares to go to the city of Rotodorpo, while they realize that the other group has not progressed at all. Before leaving, the young man loads some boxes with goods, but Yuka doesn't feel safe carrying them, and there is a child in the carriage. But the little one smiles and says he has no problem, making the girl blush without knowing what is happening to her. Once they are on their way, Yuka notices that Kahabel looks strange, so she believes it is because Yatsuya did not travel with her. When they are resting for a bit, Kahabel approaches the protagonist because she wants to tell him something. But when she sees that the boy Balili is there, she simply walks away from the place, although she says with a sad look that her journey will soon end. Yuka hears this and knows that the girl was trying to confess but couldn't. So as they continue on the road, she thinks about her favorite video game and decides to help her confess. Later, when they are resting again, Yuka tells the protagonist to switch places. So when the two boys leave, they are alone inside the carriage, so according to their video game, that will help. But when she turns around, she notices that both are sleeping and the girl is not taking advantage of the moment. Afterward, she tries to get them to prepare food together, but it doesn't work, so she has the idea for them to have a combat since that would be their way of expressing themselves. But no matter how much she waits, nothing happens, and once they finish, Kahabel confronts Yuka, who simply runs away because she doesn't want to get hurt. After all the attempts, the girl feels frustrated because her plans are not working, so she starts complaining that the game is not working and that there must be a romantic moment. At that moment, the other team, after looking for someone to transport goods to Rotodorpo, has the idea of a search for transport companies, and luckily, they come across one that is carrying some goods to the city. So Shindu proposes to escort them to the place, but there is a man in the carriage who says he doesn't want competition, so he tries to stop the heroes, but thanks to Yu, they manage to defeat him. That night, Yuka still doesn't know how to help the soldier, but when she closes her eyes, Kahabel approaches Yatsuya, and as nervous as she is, she tells him that she wants to confess something and blushingly thanks him for helping her avenge her friend and that she wanted to tell him but didn't see the opportunity. The young man tells her that he was also angry about what happened, so there was no need to thank him, while Yuka was listening and felt disappointed to know that that was her confession. The next day, the second group continues their journey, while Yatsuya's team has already reached the city and has a plan to deliver each cargo to try to find out what goods they were. The first cargo is the prisoners that the boys leave in a church so they can take refuge and be safe. However, the mission is not fulfilled, so they proceed to the second cargo, which is the belongings of the soldiers to sell or deliver to someone, but it also doesn't work, so they have the last cargo left. Meanwhile, Shindu and Hakozaki are about to reach the city when they realize that one of the missions has been completed. Yatsuya handed parts of the soldiers from Diok to the soldiers of Rotodorpo with the intention of telling them about what they were planning to do with their hostages. So when they deliver them, the mission is completed, and now they only have to explore 5% of the map, and there is little left. So when the other group members arrive, they decide to split up to finish the mission. After the kids split up to complete the other part of the mission, they are about to finish it, but they all realize that it starts snowing, so Kahabel also notices this, and her soldier Makwa tells her they should postpone their return trip since the locals told them that strong blizzards are expected that night. However, the young woman only thinks about the heroes, especially Yatsuya, as before they departed, they said goodbye, but she didn't feel happy doing so, as she remembers that kiss with the hero and only wishes he is alright. Meanwhile, it's getting dark and the protagonist is trying to find clothing to shield himself from the cold, but it doesn't work, so as he walks, he begins to think he could lose his life to the cold, and in case he revives at that moment, he will die again since his body will be frozen. But to stop thinking about it, he continues the journey, trying to warm up. Yuka is so tired of walking that she tries to stop because she didn't expect that to happen. But upon remembering she could freeze, she decides to continue, although she only wants to see her favorite character from her video game. Hakozaki is trying to shield herself from the wind and snow with her shield and says she won't give up because when she arrived in that world, she vowed to help others as much as she could since she is in better health there than in the real world, and seeing that Shindu thanked her for being her companion and for being with her, she doesn't want to leave her behind. Lastly, Shindu also walks through the snow and is the most determined not to give up because she remembers the time she arrived in this world and realized that everything she had achieved with so much effort had been taken away from her. So she doesn't plan to lose in this place, so she decides to keep going, but on the way, she encounters a statue. As time passes, the kids get more tired and Hakozaki can see that they are closer to winning the mission. But at that moment, she loses consciousness, wishing not to lose her life in that place, so she faints. However, the protagonist realizes that two of the girls are exhausted and probably stayed behind on the way since they know they are not equipped for these moments, so he tries to continue since he only has 6 hours left and they still need to complete a bit more of the map. Although he can no longer move his legs, well, since this mission is more complicated than the previous ones as it damages mentally and physically, but at least one must survive to pass the test. At that moment, a monster appears in front of Yatsuya and begins to attack, but luckily, he manages to defeat it thanks to his skills. But then he realizes the monster had babies, so perhaps it was protecting them, and now he feels guilty for what he did. However, as he continues on the path and thinking about his companions, the young man falls into a precipice, so he realizes that if he loses his life at that moment, they will fail the mission and lose their lives in the real world. We see a new beginning with heroines facing off against a villain named Lucreful, who captures one of them. Despite the villain's threats, the leader refuses to give up, and thanks to a great power, she manages to defeat him. This is a memory that Yuka has since she was young. Her heroines were the Magia sisters, so she thought she could be one of them. But now she no longer thinks so, as she sought refuge in people who protected her as she grew up. But she betrayed them, and that's why her friends got revenge on her. However, having a common enemy brought them together again, although now she doesn't have the strength to continue. Meanwhile, the protagonist survives the fall as he landed in a secret dungeon and could warm his body. However, he realizes that Hakozaki lost her life frozen and Shindu sank in a frozen lake, so he tries to continue as it depends on him. But as he explores the area, he follows a helpless worm, but another worm appears behind him and ends up eating him. Yuka continues her path as she knows it now depends on her and Yatsuya. But at that moment, she also loses consciousness, so now only she remains, so she decides not to continue and give up. On one hand, she feels relieved because she had a pretext to give up, but then one of her heroines appears in front of her, asking her to keep going as none of the Magia sisters give up, and every time they fall, they get back up. So at that moment, the girl stands up, conjures up a power, and decides to move forward while thinking of her favorite video game character. When she's about to fall asleep, a woman appears and recognizes her as a player, so she offers to help her complete the mission, as she's riding a large cat. But when the time runs out, the kids are together, so Yuka tries to take the opportunity to tell them that it was thanks to her. But then Game Master appears as it's now the fourth member's turn to ask a question, and despite her annoyance, she asks if they are in a virtual reality. So the Master confesses that they are in a parallel reality, where everything, including people, animals, seas, and monsters, is all real. At that moment, Yatsuya realizes that he actually ended the life of a flesh and blood person, so he feels frustrated. After what happened, the kids return to the real world, so the protagonist can't stop thinking about Game Master's words and the fact that he actually killed people. This leaves him frustrated and overwhelmed because he always hated people, but after committing that act, his heart won't stop racing. After a few days, Hakozaki is in physical training when Shindu arrives and they talk about how, thanks to the parallel world, the girls have leveled up. Kuchu has managed to gain some energy in her world, although she still has her illness. But then they see Yatsuya, as they haven't been able to talk since they returned. Yu was worried after learning what the young man did and how he has become lonely and arrogant since then. Later, the young man goes home. On the way, he receives an email from Game Master, so he knows he can't avoid it, although he finds it strange that he's given him another mission alone. However, in the message, he asks how he feels after learning the truth and what he did, so he is surprised and decides to delete the message. When he returns home, he feels confused, thinking that maybe what he did was planned. At that moment, a girl appears, and to his surprise, it's Game Master, who appeared in the place just because he didn't respond to the message. Then Yatsuya tells her that part of him feels that those people deserve what happened to them because they wanted to end the lives of innocent people as an example. However, on the other hand, they knew they were just confused. But Game Master asks him the same question again since he didn't answer. So the young man tells her that he feels what he did was a mistake. After knowing the answer, Master asks him if he wants to go see the next player, as it's time for someone else to join his team. That night, Yatsuya and Game Master meet at a restaurant, and the girl tells him that the man in the place will be killed by the fourth player named Kita Tori, and he must prevent his mission. At that moment, three thugs enter, and the young man decides to interfere just because he doesn't want him to do something so atrocious. But by interfering, he ends up taking them all down thanks to the skills he gained in the other world. However, the mafia leader finds out what's happening and appears with a gun to kill Yatsuya, who lets his enemy escape. However, the girl gives the young man a mage glove that helps him avoid being shot while asking Tori to flee from the police, although he first takes care of the mobster who tries to shoot Yatsuya in the back. Then the protagonist and Game Master have a conversation where the young man realizes that his missions have an impact on the other world, as by saving Yuka, she didn't give up, and by preventing her photos from being published, she can return to this world, her safe place. So by saving the next character and his brother from being arrested, it will affect the game. However, he also tells her that human life has no value, so the new player has no value except that he is the next one. Also, so the girls could level up. Although he knows he's nobody in this world, he feels superior and great, so he won't be left behind. Kita was able to escape from the police thanks to the protagonist, but he only got involved in that situation because they owed money to the mafia leader. To pay off their debt and prevent his mother from suffering further, the man asked them to take care of a traitor, but Yatsuya prevented him from making a mistake. A week has passed since the last mission, so the kids start to wonder when the next one will be. However, Yatsuya informs them that he has already met the fifth member, whom he considers scum. The girls send a message asking what kind of scum he is, but at that moment, they are transported to the other world and hear a scream coming from the lake, which turns out to be Kita. When they emerge from the water, the girls notice his attire and think he's dangerous. Just as he tries to speak, everything turns dark and Game Master appears behind the young man, scaring him. However, he then gives them the new mission, which is to present a Jiffen Bafo at Victimania in 20 days, while the role of the new member is a lance warrior. After Game Master leaves, Shindu gives them a quick explanation of what's happening, but the young man says he doesn't understand the complexity, but will accept the challenge. Before leaving, however, he has unfinished business with Yatsuya, so he challenges him to a duel, and to everyone's surprise, Kita manages to win. The group arrives in Kortunnel, as they can now teleport to a place they already know. There, they decide to gather information about the new mission. Upon entering the city, they encounter Kahabel, who blushes as her two sons are behind her, surprising the kids as they didn't know she could change so much. When they're at her house, she tells them she has no information about Bafo, but there's a famous island called Jiffo where artisanal weapons are exported. She also tells them that when they left, the kingdom of Diak declared war on them and several kingdoms sided with Kortunnel. The battlefield was a war and she lost a hand there, so after having her two sons, she decided to stop fighting, thinking she had become weak. However, the kids don't think the same, as raising two children is difficult work. At that moment, Kita interrupts the conversation to recount that he witnessed his brother's birth and that they live only with their mother, but due to a debt, they had to do a difficult job. Thanks to Yatsuya, that debt was settled, so he thanks him, although he mentions that their initial fight was because he hit his younger brother. In the early morning, Kahabel asks the protagonist to speak in private, so when they are alone, she takes his hand and says she wants to watch the sunrise with him. Yatsuya apologizes for what happened because if they hadn't stood in his way, her soldier wouldn't have lost his life, but she only thanked him because it was a great experience for her. She then asks him if her friends told him what happened that time he saved her, and upon learning that he never knew, she takes him by the arm and kisses him, confessing that she liked him, although she regrets having aged before. The girls were spying on what was happening and feel a bit sad about what happened, but at that moment, Hekozaki meets the boy she saved in the village, who is now a grown man, and he thanks her for saving him from the troll, making the young woman relieved that he is well and that what she did was worth it. The next day, the kids arrive at Jiffo Island, where they are received by some young girls, the Vaktim, ritual dancers Yana and Ayu, with great joy as they thought they were mercenaries. But upon learning that they aren't, they completely change their attitude. Kita tells them they can be if they answer their questions, so the girls tell them that Victimania is a festival and Jiffo Bafo is an animal. Yasuya assumes they must give the animal as an offering at the festival, but the girls tell them that the festival hasn't taken place in years because orcs began to inhabit the Kumano Castle, which sparked a war. Although the monsters managed to defeat them, despite surrendering, the orcs never saw them as opponents because they used them as food. To prevent this from happening, they gave them a Jiffo Bafo as an offering, so they began to breed and use them as offerings to avoid being eaten. But every year there are more orcs and fewer animals, so they will soon start to eat them, which is why they were looking for mercenaries to kill the monsters and live in peace. However, a man overhears the conversation and immediately informs the orc chief. The next day, the mercenaries begin training the locals and even the heroes. However, the leader of the mercenaries, named Cantil, tells the protagonist that with such short weapons, he won't be able to fight the orcs, as they are strong and long weapons are required to avoid getting too close. Hakozaki and Yuka are also not approved, while Shindu and Kita are. This upsets Yatsuya, and he leaves, saying he will level up. Later, he meets the victim to ask if there are any other types of monsters on the island, but luckily, they say no, as their ancestors eradicated them all. Due to this, he has no choice but to level up depending on their occupations, so he starts harvesting. But at that moment, there's a small earthquake, causing the crops to suffer, and the young man realizes they could lose the food. However, Yana tells him it's normal since the fruits tend not to ripen because the soil lacks nutrients, as they only use Bafo's manure. But due to the orcs, there are now fewer animals. Therefore, Yatsuya comes up with the idea of using algae and shells, as they only need to wait for them to decompose once mixed with the soil. At that moment, Yana reveals a bit too much, and Oyu notices that the young man was staring at her, so she gets upset. The young man tells them they misinterpreted the situation, but then the girls speak seriously and tell them they try to stay away from men, as they must remain virgins. If not, they must retire, and there's no one who can replace them. Yatsuya feels confused and asks about their age, to which the girls become sad, as they are of legal age and accepted to be victim when they were little. But due to the orcs, no one wanted to replace them, and those who remained were eaten by the orcs. Later, the young man returns to his work and starts cooking to gain experience as a chef. Then he speeds up the fertilization process to be able to cultivate, which surprises the girls as it works. At that moment, the young man gets tired of working, so he asks for a radio to listen to music while doing his chores. The girls say that's his job, so they prepare themselves and start singing. But when they finish, Yatsuya gets angry, as that's not what he meant. The mercenaries continue training the locals, but one of them complains that they are the ones hired to fight and that they are trying to send the islanders. The others tell him that it was a decision made by everyone to fight, as they are invading their island. At that moment, an orc appears, and everyone except the locals goes after them. Despite Shindu and Kita's attempts, they lose their lives with one blow. But the girl can see the strength and skills of the mercenaries, as they all manage to defeat the orc, who is too strong and a tough opponent. When the fight ends, everyone wonders why the monster came out of the castle and headed towards them. At that moment, they realize there's a traitor among them, but some blame the victim, as they call the mercenaries. So the heroes start to get upset. But a mercenary named Thanzimer says he also lived on the island, so he asks them what their ancestors would think of what they are doing. He then makes them realize that they should fight for the island their ancestors worked hard to make what it is today. His words reach everyone, and now they are more determined to fight. But the traitor of the place overhears everything and goes to tell the orcs, who say they will take revenge for the death of their companion. The next day, while the protagonist is sewing, Game Master arrives to spin the roulette again, as he has reached level 10. Luckily, he is a blacksmith, so he gets upset. But when he sees that he can create weapons, he decides to go to the local blacksmith and spends the whole night creating his weapons for battle. The next morning, he returns to training and shows them the weapon he created called Ortaka. But he also created weapons for the girls. Then Kita approaches him and asks which of the 3 girls he is interested in, and he is interested in Shindu. But the protagonist only thinks he is crazy. In the evening, Hakozaki visits Yatsuya, who never stops working. But he does it to keep them alive because he worries about keeping her and Shindu alive. At that moment, Cantil arrives and overhears their conversation. He tells them that he was a commander of the troops of his country, but in all his commands, they lost the battle. So now he doesn't want to lose anything in the world. However, at that moment, a local arrives and tells them that the orcs are attacking the port, killing everyone there. Rice tells the guys his best memory, which is when he was a child. He and his friends worked for an arrogant noble but dreamed of joining Cantil's army. However, they weren't good enough. One day, they found out their country had fallen, so he and his friends had to flee from those who wanted to annihilate them. However, they were caught by bandits who ended their friends' lives. The guys are surprised that those are his best memories. Yatsuya is amazed at how the young man tells of the hell he lived with a smile, while the others can't believe that memory is the best, which makes them a little scared. But another mercenary hugs him and tells him that now his victory will be his best memory. That night, the locals are invaded by 3 orcs, so the mercenaries try to stop them after they end the lives of some civilians. Shindu and Kita also try to help, but their attacks are too weak, and as a result, they end up annihilated, so they have to wait to revive. At that moment, the orcs are about to attack Cantil, but Yatsuya ends one of them with his new weapon. However, the orcs continue after the leader of the mercenaries, but Rice comes to his rescue, although he falls on the way. But this was only a distraction for the protagonist to hurt them again, and once he does, the enemies leave the place. Later, everyone prepares for battle. The wounded are sent to the victim's cave to receive treatment, while those who can fight wait on the elevated grounds to battle. Yuka and Hakozaki are responsible for hurting the orcs with a weapon the protagonist prepared, while he and Rice try to get their attention to make it easier for the girls. At that moment, 2 orcs appear, and the guys go out to distract them so the girls can hurt one. To their surprise, Yuka reaches level 10. So Game Master appears to choose her new occupation, and she gets Hunter, so she's happy because she can now be like her favorite video game character. The next morning, the battle continues, so when another orc appears, a protagonist tries to get its attention but fails. But at that moment, he sees the enemy pick up a large rock and throw it at the fort, so they begin to destroy it to enter the village. The locals try to escape while the girls try to hit their shot but fail. Rice goes out to face them but is defeated by one of them. Then when Yatsuya comes back to life, he tries to attract the monster, so he ends one of them, and thanks to Yuka and Hakozaki, they end the second one. But as a consequence, Rice loses his life, so the guys get sad. But before leaving, Yatsuya tells him that now he can brag to his friends that he fought alongside Kantil. One of the islanders reports the information to where the other teams are, so everyone mourns Rice's loss, but Kita is sent to help at the fort. After they manage to end other orcs at the fort, the girls run out of ammunition, so they decide to go look for more with the blacksmith, who is still working to have weapons, and then with the victim, since they also need protection. But before leaving, the heroes say goodbye to Rice. Later, leader Kantil tells Shindu that the numbers of the total orcs left don't add up, and the queen, who hasn't appeared yet, is still missing. She notices the children who were evacuated, so she goes to check that everything is okay. But when she arrives at the port, they realize that the orc queen is there because she intends to annihilate them since they did the same with their children, not to mention that the islanders were the ones who broke the pact they had and started the war. After what happened, Shindu and Kantil confront the orc queen who's going after the island's children. Luckily, in the fight, they manage to injure her, but it's not enough as she is very strong. Meanwhile, the other heroes head to the blacksmiths, but before they do, they pass by one of the elevated terrains and find one of the wounded mercenaries who tells them that 2 orcs attacked them, and unfortunately, his companion lost his life. Despite being able to end one of the enemies, the other fled, but Thenzimer went after him. After the protagonist manages to heal the mercenary's wound a bit, they reach the blacksmiths, but since the weapons were made by him, the heroes can't use them if the islanders can. So one of them prepares to shoot with the weapon, while the others go to the victim's cave to leave the wounded in battle. The battle continues at every point on the island. Thenzimer is fighting with the orc who fled from the territory but fails to injure him and is thrown far away with just one blow. Yatsuya is at Kumano Castle with Kia, who orders some islanders to attack the orc at the castle's entrance, while Shindu and Kantil put their plan into action, which is working. But when they are about to attack, an earthquake shakes the island, stronger than the previous ones. The victim realized that the earth is speaking because there was a volcanic eruption. In Kumano Castle, Yatsuya orders them to advance with their heads down, but he realizes that Kita was hit by one of the volcano's fireballs, so he starts dragging him to safety. Meanwhile, in the cave, the victims start to evacuate the wounded, but Oyu goes back to the cave because there were still people inside, but the roof collapses, so Biana starts screaming for her, but she can't do anything. On the island's coast, Shindu is distracted for a moment, and the orc queen takes advantage of it to end her by throwing her into the sea, so she knows she won't be able to revive since she's underwater. But she starts to realize that the water begins to recede and asks Kantil to flee because it's a tsunami, but the leader of the mercenaries wants to keep fighting. After the cave's roof collapses, Yana is too depressed to see what's happening around her, so she starts singing the ritual song, and one of the islanders realizes that the song is about a memory of the calamity that struck the island many years ago. While Yana sings the ritual song, natural phenomena devastate the island, but OU manages to escape with the wounded left in the cave through a tunnel that connects the cave to the castle. When they arrive, they meet Yatsuya, Kita, and the other islanders, who are watching everything that happened on the island. The protagonist tries to destroy the castle and, failing to do so, asks the victim if there's a weak point in the castle, as he wants to bring it down with the remaining orcs inside. But the young woman gets upset as the place is part of the island and was built by their ancestors, and it has withstood many earthquakes. So Yatsuya enters the castle alone to find a combat site where they have an advantage in battle. Oyu remembers what the young man told her when she was working with the blacksmith, as he only uses the means to achieve his goal, sacrificing himself. So the young man tells her that as long as he has a goal, it doesn't matter what he has to do to achieve it, as long as he succeeds. Because of what happened, the victim feel responsible for what happened, since they are responsible for transmitting the history of the island and their ancestors, and for not doing so, the island's houses were destroyed and many lost their lives. However, they know they must not give up, since despite what happened, it will prosper again and no natural disaster will make them give up. But at that moment, the volcano starts to erupt, but when they look toward the place, they notice a fire dragon coming out of it. After what happened, Yatsuya returns to Kita and Oyu, so he tells them what he discovered about the castle, and that the only way to beat them is in the hallway, but they also have contradictions, so together with Terry, they put one of their plans into action, but the first one doesn't work. So on the second try, they manage to wound one, but both end up dead, and while waiting for them to revive, the protagonist can see that they almost eat his companion, but also that there is a little girl. Oryu tells them that she must be the future queen since orcs are usually males but can produce a female, so she's probably the future queen. He knows this because he and Yana read a book about those monsters. He even knows that they have their own language, so the young man asks her to tell the monsters the phrase she knows. However, the girl can't do it because the only phrase she knows is something vulgar. While the island is being destroyed by natural phenomena, the queen arrives at the boat where the island's children are and asks them to hide because they will be her food for the journey, but now she must go back for her family. Although at that moment, Thanzimer appears to confront the orc. In the castle, the boys prepare to attack the remaining orcs, and for that, Oyu distracts them with the only phrase she knows in their language while Yatsuya and Kita attack the monsters with their plan. Luckily, they managed to kill one, but the other was only wounded with the lava they brought, although this served to kidnap the orc girl. Meanwhile, Yana feels strange as if she's out of breath, so she realizes that everyone is the same because the dragon is absorbing their life force not only from them, but also from those who died in battle. On the boat, Thanzimer is about to confront the queen, who is afraid as she carries a big sword, but she sees that a big wave is about to come, so she takes the opportunity to take away her weapon and finish him off. But when she was about to end the fight, Shindu appears, who managed to escape from the depths of the sea thanks to the tsunami. The girl is without armor to be lighter, so it works as she manages to wound the queen. Meanwhile, Hepazaki tries to save the blacksmith and another islander as they can't breathe and the lava is about to reach them. When this happens, Yuka gets ammunition but sacrifices herself as she is hit by the lava. During the battle on the boat, Shindu is defeated by the queen, so in anger at what they did to her children, she tries to finish Thanzimer, but when she was about to do it, a bullet injures her in the back. So when she turns around, she notices that Hakozaki and the blacksmith are the ones responsible because due to the disasters that are happening, the boat was dragged to the shore, leaving the orcs seriously injured. Thanzimer takes advantage and delivers the final blow, both falling to the ground. However, she at that moment only thought of saving her family, but could not do it. Once the queen is defeated, the lava begins to reach the boat, so the mercenary is hit by it. Meanwhile, in the castle, Yatsuya flees from the last orc since he kidnapped the girl. But when they are on the bridge, the protagonist throws the girl over the cliff, but the orc manages to catch her, although he realizes that she was wounded. So the young man thinks that he hates humans because they try to eliminate all those who could cause problems in the future. Although now he must do the same even if he doesn't want to, so he throws both into the lava, thus ending all the orcs. Once the fight is over, Oyu tells the young man that he remembers a boat arriving at the island, but there was only the orc queen. But it is said that she was a prisoner and that she managed to escape, so they do not know why she was sent to that island. He also tells the protagonist that his energy is being absorbed and everything is heading to the top of the volcano. So the young man realizes that it is because of the dragon. Thanzimer struggles to get the boat out of the approaching lava as he thinks about the time he left the island because he didn't want to live like the other inhabitants who only lived in peace and tranquility, knowing that there were more impressive things beyond the sea. However, as he traveled from nation to nation, he realized that in some places people fought for the peace of their homelands or the safety of their families, and he realized that the tranquility of Jiffen Island was what he longed for, which is ironic since he realized this when he left it. After the heroes defeat the remaining orcs, Yatsuya and Kita head to the top of the volcano. On the way, they encounter an islander who tells them that he returned from the boat that needed their help but stayed hiding among the rocks, so the boys ask him to return with the group. When the heroes reach the summit, Kita decides to attack the dragon, but is defeated by the flames of the fire, so Yatsuya has no choice but to escape. On the way, he thinks that he doesn't know the purpose of the dragon or why it is consuming people's energy. On the way, he meets the islander again, who was hiding, and without thinking, he quickly carries him to get him out of the place, but he hears the man start to laugh and tells him that apparently, he realized that he is responsible for what is happening since he is the dragon bishop and summoned the dragon Darasweed. He is responsible for the orcs being on the island as he brought the orc queen on the boat. The young man stops and throws the man away, both surprised because the protagonist knew nothing about it, and the man because he revealed his secret and thought that the hero took him to throw him into a nearby well. Because of this, the fight between them begins, but the dragon bishop casts a spell ending the hero. But after reviving several times, Kita appears, and no matter how hard they try, they are no match for the man as he can conjure magic. After defeating them, the wizard runs away, so Yatsuya realizes that he is going after Victim. Meanwhile, Oyu is in the castle. The man arrives where she is and begins to attack her. So the girl is surprised that Raji, who is respected on the island, is responsible for everything since it was his idea to build at the bottom of the island. When Raji is about to attack her, the protagonist appears and manages to save her, so when they escape, she asks him a favor. They both decide to combine their magic and prevent their opponent from invoking another spell, although this was a distraction since Kita manages to injure him by surprise. However, Raji manages to escape with the dragon. When everything is over, the boys find a bottle with a red liquid, so Kita takes them to the place where he saw the same substance, and it turns out to be a hexagram to absorb energy and the place where the man was hiding. Yana, along with the mercenary, realize that their energy has begun to return to normal, but Victim also notices the presence of the hexagram, so they decide to erase it. But according to her, for the absorption of the spell to succeed, there must be 6 others, of which 2 were erased. So the mercenary starts drawing lines on her island map, so they find the other hexagrams, so they go out to erase all of them. So once they finish, everyone recovers their energy, and thanks to this, the dragon returns to the volcano, ending the disasters. Once everything is over, the survivors gather and say goodbye to those who died in battle, including Cantil and Thanzimer. The next day, the Victimania festival is celebrated where a Jiffo Baffo is offered as a tribute. The Victim thank the boys for helping them, although OU hugs the protagonist and confesses that if it weren't for him not being from that world, she would marry him. So the whole group doesn't understand how the young man manages to attract the attention of the girls in that world. Meanwhile, in the sea, Cantil is there as he survived the tsunami, and seeing Ryaji pass by on his dragon, he calls for help, but a great power ends the wizard and his animal, surprising the mercenary. The one responsible for this is a sorceress named Fatina, who also helped Yuka on one of the missions. A few days later, the protagonist meets a young woman and a group of guys, where she introduces herself in English as Glenda and mentions that a girl in white told her she would meet him soon, so she went to meet him to film him. At that moment, the young man remembers that the game master warned him that he would soon meet the 6th member. When they are at Yatsuya's grandfather's house, she mentions that she already knew about them because 4 people were talking on the internet about their travels to another world, and they all described the same thing even though they had no connection since they were an Egyptian, American, a French woman, and a Japanese. Although the young man thought they were his friends, he realizes that they were not the only ones transported to that world. She continues telling him that she tried to communicate with them, but the French woman died of a heart attack, while the others have not yet responded, so they both believe that if they did not read the messages, they may have failed in the mission. However, the Japanese who was talking about the other world is Yuka, which the young man is not surprised by. At that moment, the girl proposes to tell her story since she told him from the beginning that she was there to film him and make her own independent film. Later, the protagonist, along with Shindu and Hakozaki, are about to shoot their first scenes with the help of Yatsuya's friends, who start asking the young man which of the 2 is his girlfriend and why he didn't tell them about the girls he knew before. The first to shoot is Shindu, since she's the first to be recruited, while Yatsuya acts as the game master. Luckily, the first scenes come out perfectly. Once everything concludes, Shindu demands payment from the protagonist since her job is to be a model, and she doesn't work for free. However, he tells her that what he is doing is for the benefit of everyone, to which she asks in return that he use his native accent with her and the others as he does with his friends. After they published the video, someone commented saying that they also know that place since they are heroes. When they are teleported to the other world, Glenda's occupation is a warrior with an axe, so they realize that almost everyone is a warrior, including Hakozaki, who is now a heavy warrior and leveled up when they were on the island, but didn't use it since the armor was too heavy for her. Later, the Game Master gives them a new mission, but this time they must choose between reducing addiction to the Rainbow Staircase in Goldiep to less than 3% in 90 days or preventing the destruction of Zagrota Village in 30 days. While the protagonist thinks about which would be the best option, Kita decides on the second option without consulting since according to him, it could be easier. For this, they head back to the city of Korkanal to inquire about the village. When they arrive in the city, they go to Kabel's house, but upon finding her, they realize that she is actually her daughter since 17 years have passed and the warrior died. Still, the young woman helps the warriors get halfway to their destination since fighting alongside the heroes was what her mother was most proud of. However, the protagonist feels guilty since he believes he only used her. When they are halfway there, they have to pass through a jungle, which seems strange to the kids because the village is hidden and not registered on the map. Then everyone notices that Glenda speaks Japanese, so she says that she listens to everyone in English, but apparently someone translates the languages so they can understand each other. Then the kids can see that a goblin is in front of them, so Kita decides to go after him. However, he is defeated, and none can stop him, although thanks to Glenda, the fight ends. The kids realize that something is strange since goblins are usually the lowest threat, but upon analyzing it, Yatsuya realizes that it has leveled up at that moment. Kita realizes that someone is watching them, so the new member goes after that person but ends up at a graveyard with Hikozaki following her. Upon entering a hut, they find a scared girl who realizes that the girls are heroines, so she no longer feels any threat. Later, the girl introduces herself as Jesby, and due to the kids' questions, she tells them that she ran away from them because she thought they were from the village, which is in the mountain. Yatsuya tries to ask her to take them there, but Glenda realizes that she cannot because she is running away from them. The next day, the kids help with gathering food and water for the girl, but they hear a noise, and upon seeing what it was, they see a man possessed by a small monster, but that man is actually the girl's father. After what happened, Yatsuya arrives and tells them that other players talk to them about it. So it's a parasite called Wireworm that controls others' brains, and to end them, they must burn themselves along with the infected. Jesby hears this and tries to interfere, but they can't do anything more because the man died as his brain was controlled. However, the infected is very strong, so he kills Hakozaki, but the protagonist annihilates him and asks Yuka to set him on fire so that it doesn't continue spreading. The girl, upon seeing so much atrocity, ends up fainting. Later, when they are in the cabin, the protagonist tells Hakozaki that in case she can't do the job, she should leave it to him since he did it before and got his hands dirty for it. The next day, the girl decides to take the heroes to the entrance of the village, which some find strange. Upon entering the cave, they decide to camp since there is still a long way to go. There, the girl decides to tell them that in the village, they undertake the journey of hope where they choose older people to go out and look for a place where they can live better because every year the monsters that attack them become stronger. So they harvest less, and because of this, they get rid of villagers so they have fewer mouths to feed, and one of them was her father, who, along with a guy named Dan, tried to speak to the leader, but they were not accepted, and they were sent to what they call the Journey of Death. Since they never returned, however, she stayed with her brother and her sick mother, so she decided to flee and bring her father back, but upon finding him, he told her that they would execute her if she returns, so she decided to go talk to the leader, but she never returned for her, so now she is running away from the villagers. The next day, the kids arrive at the village. They meet a boy named Frock who turns out to be Jesby's friend. The boy takes the kids to his cabin and tells his friend that his mother died from the disease, so she decides to see her younger brother. But because of what happened, the little one has no reaction at all, so Jesby feels bad seeing him. Because of this, the protagonist decides to go out for a walk with Glenda since he feels some remorse for what he did and for not having arrived earlier helped cure Jesby's mother. At that moment, a girl with her servants intercepts them. She, with an annoyed tone, tells them that they don't need heroes in the village since if there is any problem, her grandfather will solve it. The kids realize that she is the granddaughter of the leader of Cox Darayo village, and the girl's name is Iris Darayo. Later, Yatsuya and Glenda meet with the village leader and he tells them that he heard about them, but doesn't need their help since they live peacefully. The new member begins to think that he's trying to get rid of them, but Yatsuya tells the man what they heard about the monsters that haunt them. Cox becomes serious and tries to find out who they heard it from, but the kids can't reveal that it was Jesby. However, Iris reveals that it was the girl who ran away some time ago since she saw her with the heroes. The man tries to apologize for what he did to Jesby, but he tells them again that they don't need their help since they have a secret plan that he decides to tell them, so he takes them to a dungeon where he tries to teach them something, but they are locked up since it was all a trap. That same night, the leader arrives at Frock's cabin, where he comes to take the traitor Jesby, but to his surprise, more heroes are in the place, so he tricks them again and invites them to his mansion for a feast along with the other two members. However, when they are on the way, the man cuts the bridge, leaving the heroes about to fall into a bottomless swamp, while the leader's soldiers capture Jesby. Shindo manages to knock down Cox with his wind ability, although he will lose some experience for attacking a human. However, they must now focus on their friends and Jesby. The villagers who were with the leader capture Jesby as she will be executed, while the heroes have Cox hostage to guide them to his mansion and thus save their friends. But there they encountered a crowd as a great roar of a monster was heard. When the villagers see that their leader is captured, they don't understand what is happening and why the heroes are in their village, so Cox, who was only doing his duty as a leader since they brought Jesby back and he must face the consequences for violating the rules, while the heroes are there to take over the village. At that moment, Jesby arrives as a hostage, but Frock pushes away the men holding her, although it's useless as now they want to capture him at the order of Cox, as he won't allow anyone to break the rules of his village. Suddenly, they hear a loud noise, so the leader seizes the opportunity to tell everyone that both Frock and his mother hid the girl, and everyone brought calamity to the village, so the villagers try to capture the culprits. But Kita gets upset at the situation as it reminds him of what he went through, so he hits Cox and asks him to take them to their friends. When they enter the mansion, Iris welcomes them all and tells them that she threw the dungeon key into a well behind the house so they won't be able to recover it, while Frock sends his mother and Jesby back home as he will stay with the heroes, but when they leave, a large monster appears outside the village. Frock enters the mansion to warn the heroes that the monster has arrived, but as they look out the window, they can see that it's a large number, so now they must think about how to face them all. Iris pleads with them to defeat them, so Kita gets upset as she has no right to speak after what she did. At that moment, they feel a great tremor in the room, but it's only Yatsuya and Glenda who manage to escape from the dungeon as it was only made of wood. Upon seeing the number of enemies approaching, the protagonist begins to wonder if the destruction of Zagroth refers to the village or its inhabitants. Later, they try to figure out how to make the villagers escape since the cave they came through is impossible due to the enemies, so they head to the well Iris spoke of, and not knowing if it's safe, Heprazaki decides to jump to make sure it's secure and has an exit, so after doing so and reviving, the heroes decide to make a way down. Later, Kita and Yuka try to call all the villagers, but on the way they are caught by the flames of the great monster and none of them survive. Frock begins to get frustrated as his mother and friends haven't returned, but then he hears Jesby's voice arriving with her brother. However, the boy's mother didn't survive while saving them. The few survivors descend into the cave, including Iris, who slips, but Hakozaki catches her and saves her. So her grandfather Cox thanks her and apologizes for what he has done in recent years. When the monsters realize they are fleeing, they head towards the mansion. Kita and Yuka realize that seeing the enemies around them, they have no choice but to lose their lives, but they actually mean to jump into the well, while Yatsuya is the last to stay in the village, so he knows something strange happened. So he thinks maybe someone is controlling or sent them. When he sees that they are getting too close, he also decides to jump. So once everyone is inside the well, they must now escape from the place. The next day, the group manages to exit the cave, so the heroes realize that they have not yet failed the mission as some villagers are still alive. So they decide to continue on the path until they can take shelter, but Glenda notices something in the distance, so she and Yatsuya decide to go investigate while the others wait for their return. The two heroes come across a settlement, which seems strange to them as those who led them said there was no one there. However, as they approach, they notice that there is no one, so they decide to use it as a refuge, while the other group rests waiting for their friend's return, but some goblins are watching them. After Glenda and Yatsuya arrived at the settlement, they heard a noise, so they prepared to fight, but they were surprised to find some villagers there. Meanwhile, the other team rested, but goblins attacked them, so the heroes decided to take charge while Yuka escaped with the villagers since she couldn't do much. While battling the monsters, Shindu leveled up, becoming an elite warrior, so she took care of everything. Yuka started to flee. They encountered a big goblin, so she decided to attack, but it didn't work, and just when it seemed like she was losing, Glenda appeared to help. Then Yatsuya arrived with a villager named Dan, who is Frock's brother, so the settlement they found is where everyone who went on the Hope journeys lives. That night, everyone rested at the settlement. Jesby told Dan what happened with his father and mother, but the young man just told her that the important thing is that they are okay. Meanwhile, some villagers bothered the leader because he worked so that those who stayed in the village would survive, yet everyone lost their lives while those who left survived. Later, they tried to plan where to go since Yatsuya said the monsters would continue to follow them, knowing that's the mission, and the enemies would go after the humans. Dan proposed going to New Eden, but the leader said it's just a legend, as those who choose death go to New Eden, as it's the afterlife. However, Jesby said the place does exist since her real parents told her about a peaceful land beyond the forest, although to reach it, it must pass through a goblin settlement. The next night, Yatsuya, Shindu, and Kita decided to go to the goblin settlement, but when they tried to catch them off guard, everything turned upside down. Meanwhile, the others waited for their arrival. Hakozaki told Glenda about their last mission and confessed that she still doesn't feel sure about taking the lives of others. Glenda then shared her past life story, how her father showed them images of people injured due to war, and when she confessed to being a lesbian, he aimed a gun at her, so she decided to leave home. At that moment, Yuka arrived, a bit nervous, and took her friends to the village leader, who had been wounded in the heart, so Glenda decided to join the other villagers, knowing that one of them was responsible for the wound inflicted by a human, and they all held a grudge against him, but they denied being the culprits. The next day, the group bid farewell to the leader, although they still had to find the culprit. Then the heroes took the survivors to the goblin settlement to camp. There, Iris told the other children and Kita that when she was in the village, she saw a dragon pass by with its rider, so they could ask for help, which seemed strange to Kita. Later, Glenda gathered the survivors of the settlement because she knew who the culprit was. In front of everyone, she accused the cook, stating that he had his knife and talked about the wound without even mentioning it. Iris overheard this and tried to find out why he did it to her grandfather. Because of this, they decided to leave him alone in a hut far from the others. While everyone was sleeping, the heroes discussed what to do with the culprit, but Kita saw Iris approaching the hut where the cook was, so he went after her to stop her, thinking she would harm him, but when the girl turned around, he could see that she was possessed by the wireworm. Iris attacks Kita, so the other heroes arrive and don't know what to do, but the protagonist takes up his weapon, saying that's his job, but to his surprise, it's Kita who finishes her off. Then they decide to bring her along with the monster while they think about when the infection occurred, since the girl was with them all the time. The next day, the group bids farewell to Iris and the cook since he was injured by the girl. Then, Dan tells some of the heroes that they've all started to feel tired and weak, so they realize the same thing is happening as on the island, and they think it's also due to the dragon and the absorption points. Meanwhile, Kita feels sad about what happened, so Shindu goes to cheer him up because it's her duty, and despite horrible things happening, they must survive because he must protect his younger brother. Later, Jesby tells the heroes she remembered where New Eden was, but it's an area none of them have visited, so they're not sure about going. At that moment, several monsters appear, so Hakozaki and Yuka flee with the villagers while the others stay to fight. They eventually win, but to their surprise, a troll appears and kills Shindu and Hakozaki by eating parts of them. However, the monster flees when a blizzard appears, and the kids turn around to see Kanto behind them. Later, Cantil tells them that 17 years have passed since they last saw him, and he was saved by the great sorceress Fatina and has been by her side since. The dragon Bishop was destroyed, but since then, they've been traveling the world hunting and killing all the Bishop dragons, who are people using a ritual to absorb people's energy to revive the dragon Darasweed, and if it's revived, it will annihilate all of humanity. He also tells them that a meteorite fell, increasing the amount of mana in the monsters and making them stronger. So to prevent them from performing their ritual, they must plant seeds to seal the effects of the meteorite. The next day, Yatsuya decides to plant one of the seeds with his magic, but he hears Cantil telling the others that the kingdom of Diok hid a Bishop dragon, but they killed it since it planned to use it to start a war. After they finish planting the seed, it grows like a vine, and Glenda stays in the settlement to take care of the villagers while the others set out to find New Eden. Later, the kids find the troll that ate the girls, so thanks to Yuka managing to blind one of its eyes, Kita manages to kill it, and both Shandu and Hakozeki come back to life. Then they reach a waterfall, so according to what Jesby said, the place is above it, so they must climb, but they use one of the seeds to climb. Meanwhile, in the settlement, Jesby's younger brother manages to wake up after being knocked out, but also regains his knowledge and starts talking, something he hadn't done since his mother's death. So Frock tries to calm him down while telling him he'll take him to his sister. Once the heroes manage to climb and reach the top, they find nothing, so they realize it was in vain. However, Yatsui has a small intuition and decides to jump down the waterfall, although the others disagree. Once he does, he reaches a city inhabited by at least 300 people, and a man tells him they live in peace there, but it has no name, so he supposes that's New Eden. Meanwhile, the little Lannon sees his sister but starts crying because he says he doesn't recognize her, so she tries to manipulate him with some magic, but Glenda arrives saying she already knows her secret, which is that Jesby is a Bishop dragon. Glenda recounts how she realized that Jesby is the Bishop dragon since she suspected it from the day they met. It seems strange to her that Jesby was alone in a forest inhabited by many monsters. The day they arrive at the village, Jesby went on her own to make sure everything was in order, but what she did was implant memories into all the villagers as if they knew her, except this didn't work on Lannon because he had mental problems. When they met Dan, he didn't know her, but she used magic on him at that moment. Furthermore, it was she who incited the villagers to end Cox's life. Jesby later interrogated the villagers, and they told her that the girl had told them what happened to her family. She can place the insect in Iris, so Glenda feels responsible for it. Jesby reveals her true face and personality, confirming everything said by the hero. At that moment, a dragon appears and says he was looking for a place to perform a ritual until he saw the small part of the meteorite and thought he could use it to assimilate all human lives at once. But during that journey, he didn't think Iris would see her. However, he came across a small settlement where he met Baze, who was supposedly her father, who told her about a place called New Eden. But when he began to suspect her, he infected her. Then the heroes appeared, and she used them to search for her, and they arrived at Zagrov, where she ended those lives because she needed them for her ritual. Dan and Frock are upset because she abandoned her mother, but when Jesby was about to attack him, Cantil appears and scares her away with his magic, so she manages to escape. When Yatsuya manages to emerge from the waterfall, the other kids are waiting for him to confirm that what leader Cox told them was true. Those who chose to die by their own will arrive at New Eden. So many villagers jumped to escape and ended up in that city. However, they believe it's too much of a coincidence. But at that moment, Jesby arrives and reveals herself, saying that everything was her plan to revive the great dragon Darasweed. She calls the monsters to destroy the hidden city, so the heroes, along with Cantil, try to defeat the monsters. While the monsters try to destroy the city, Cantil deciphers the magic circle but receives an attack from Jesby, so he asks Yatsuya to finish it off because there are golems that aren't attacking and only move in circles, so they protect the circle and must get rid of the 6 of them. However, Jesby doesn't let them advance, putting several monsters attacking him, so Yatsuya decides to go deal with the problem and climbs up the cliff to attack Jesby. But no matter how hard he tries, she is too strong. Although with just one scratch, he manages to implant a seed in her, and thanks to her power to advance the process, the plant grows in her, causing her power to end, and they both end up falling. So the power in the monsters is over, and the other heroes break the magic circle. Once everything is over, the protagonist finally wakes up as he had fainted for a long time due to the mana growing in him. Then he sees that Jesby is still alive but trapped among the vines of the plant, which weakens her power. So the young man decides to end her once and for all because she has killed many people. But Kaprazaki stops him because he doesn't want him to continue getting his hands dirty, while Glenda tells him that those matters must be resolved by the people of that world. Yatsuya agrees but says he won't forgive what she has done. At that moment, Frock asks her if she also manipulated his feelings, so the girl starts laughing and replies that she only loves the dragon god, while she burns in the flames as she ended her own life. Then the sorceress Fatina appears to get rid of the meteorite fragment since the dragon could return. This allows the others to see the hidden city without any problems. The heroes take the villagers to the city where some meet old friends, While there, Yatsuya proposes to the inhabitants to name the city Zagroth since it has no name. When they finish the mission, Glenda asks her question, how the dragon reaches their world, so the game master replies that there is a hole that connects both worlds and that it expands more and more until it allows the dragon to pass. Her question was based on a user showing her, through a video, a goblin army on the shores of a sea. After a few days, the kids return to their usual lives awaiting the next mission.